faster than we think it does.
It
We're
does.
live.
We're live.
What's up?
Welcome to Burnt Offerings.
Yep.
Good to see you all, or not see you, but virtually
Yes,
see you.
That's right. So tune in. If you're like us, you're going to want to grab a short cigar,
Or a long one.
or like them, where we can just open up the Word and see what God's got to say to us. And today, I think Pastor Scott mentioned something about the entire book of Exodus that we're going to go through.
We're gonna
Before you get there,
We're gonna start now.
share this link.
for
We
2
want-
hours.
Right. Before that 2-hour awesome experience, could you share this link to your newsfeed? There might be some men in your life that could use some encouragement today, and this is a great opportunity for that.
You guys
Also-
actually measure time in terms of time or just cigar time?
Cigar
Cigar
time.
time.
So this is about 2 cigars long?
Yeah, it's a two-cigar.
two cigars.
Just
long.
the reading of the verse was
Yeah.
2 cigars.
I
long.
like it. I like it. So yes. So if you're just tuning in, go ahead and share it. And then I thought a good observation was Seth wanted to sit forward because he says when I lean forward, it makes my arms look way bigger than they are on
I
TV.
like it.
So
I like it.
So if he's like doing this kind of thing, you know what's
Yeah,
going
just
on.
ignore it.
Ignore the pounding.
So
That's
we're
right.
gonna.
When I go forward, it makes my head look bigger.
My head.
I'll sit back.
All right.
So to break the fourth wall, as we're kind of looking at what we're going to study here today, Scott shared what he was going to study, and so he read the verse, and it was really long, and it stunned Eric to silence.
I was-
It's like he's like, could we read something that long? I just love it because he was just like this quiet after Scott was done reading.
He was more
So-
concerned whether you could pay attention for that long.
Right.
I don't think he believes in you the way I believe in you.
Well, let's read it.
All right.
We're in
What do you got?
Exodus.
Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. We're going to just read down to verse 14. There's a whole lot more to the passage that we'll refer to as we move along. But it says, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched. He watched them in their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that, seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?"
Ooh.
Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." And then he flees to the Midian desert, runs into a bunch of daughters of actually a Reuel, who was a Midian priest, and he pours water for them, and he ends up going and having dinner with the father, and Zipporah, one of the daughters, gets given to Moses in marriage, and he spends the next 40 years in Midian. So anyhow, as I read this is the first thing that came out to me. I mean, Moses obviously had in his DNA, it was in his calling to be a deliverer, right? So what does he do? He's kind of sick of watching the Hebrews get beat up and mistreated. So he decides to take matters in his own hand. He kills this Egyptian taskmaster in order to do a small kind of deliverance, and well, things go south from there. So I guess the point that it said to me is that Moses really had God's plan. He had God's plan, which was to deliver the Israelites. He just didn't have the God whose plan it was. I mean, he really didn't have a relationship with God. He had an idea, he just didn't have God's idea, I guess.
Okay.
So,
Good stuff.
what's your thoughts?
You didn't get to read down there, but I was struck by the idea of Moses' son Gershom.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, where obviously this is what we do for a living, I'm thinking, have I heard that before? Did you ever get that in the Bible where you're like, have I heard that? Like, it was almost in my mind, I'm like, did I know Moses had sons? It was like this weird, So I just did a quick little down the rabbit hole, and I went to, so there's Gershom, and his other son is Eliezer. And actually they have some significant roles, and their stories are told, and they're mentioned a fair amount. But I thought that was interesting that we're talking about him having God's plan. I thought it was fascinating that he feels a call, compelled, does something he thinks is right.
Right.
He's like rescuing someone. Then he gets known. Then he runs away. And I thought it was interesting in this place where he kind of runs from Egypt is where he has a family. I don't know. It just kind of fascinated me. It wasn't when he comes back and leads Israel into the desert.
Right.
It was prior to that. So I don't know, it's just almost kind of like this idea of talking about God's plan is, I think for me today, I have to think about this is I think as a young man, I would be like, yes, here's God's plan for my life. When in reality, when I see throughout Scripture, it's as we get older that a lot of times the plan, we're like being prepared for the plan later.
Right.
We have a family, we have these other things. It's almost like God is maturing us to the plan. So I always thought my plan was at 20. It looks more like God's plans for me are more developing in my 40s.
Right.
That's interesting.
Right, and I think it's interesting that so he's 40 years. He's 40 years old at this point, not married, and then he spends 40 years in the Midian desert, and then the last 40 years he actually sees God do something significant in his life. But he needed the desert, and he needed the failure in order for him to actually become the deliverer God wanted him to be. And I think that's what we hate. We hate the fact that we have to fail, right? Maybe we don't have to, but it seems like failure is a better teacher than success sometimes.
Do you think he's like learning? So 40 and 40, right? You said 40 years in Egypt and 40 years in the Midian desert, right?
Right.
So you just said, I think it only fascinates me because whenever I do counseling with couples, like they'll be like, we've been fighting for 17 years, and then they'll start working on it, and 3 months later they get very discouraged. I'm like, oh, it took you 17 years to get here.
Right.
It doesn't take 3 months to get out. And I said, it's kind of the same thing with, you were in Egypt for 40 years. I'm sure he was in the Midian desert being like, am I ready? Am I ready? Like, are we doing this? You know what I mean? Like, there had to have been this like moment where he's like, come on, God. And God's almost like, the investment of the Egypt in is almost have to be investment of the Egypt out.
Right. He needed those 40 years to really develop a relationship with God, which is, I think I would lose my mind 40 years in the wilderness, right? I would be frustrated. Yet, how many times have we been in, and you who are watching, been in a desert, Midian desert, not sure, what's next, or if there's anything next, right? It says that during this long period, while he's in the Midian desert, raising sheep, working for his father-in-law, it says that during that time, this is the end of the chapter, the king in Egypt dies, and then it says the Israelites begin to cry out because of their harsh treatment. So it's almost like, and this is an interesting concept, it's almost like God was using the Midian desert experience to prepare Moses, to prepare the right king, the right Pharaoh, and to prepare the Egyptians, the Israelites to be delivered. So all those things had to happen to line up in order for the Exodus story to play out.
It's good.
Go ahead.
No, that's good. I'm just saying that's good. It's the timing. Things that I think it's a good timing message, right?
Right.
We're like, God, why right now? I am ready. But the right Pharaoh wasn't ready, just
Right.
like you're saying, right? The right situation was ready. That's cool that you're ready. But there's other things that need to line up for this to work.
Well, I think he needed to. I was struck with that. One, nothing's ever done in secret.
Right.
We seem to think.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it's like he's passing judgment, and it's like, you mean like you, like the murder you just,
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that even though this is a story about his process, that one, God uses screwed up people that think they're doing sinful things in secret, and they're not. And I think he had a lot to learn, and I just feel like it tells me that God can use anyone.
Yeah.
A donkey.
Anyone. A donkey. God could use a donkey, and he did.
Or Rahab, prostitute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. He used a prostitute. Interesting that he says that he looked this way and that, and he saw no one, so he kills the Egyptian. But you know what? I mean, it doesn't explain it in the text, but it would seem that he kind of overlooked the fact that there were probably Hebrews that were watching.
Yeah.
Because I think he was thinking, well, if they see me killing this Egyptian, they're all going to want me to be their deliverer, right? He was raised in the Oxford of the ancient world, in the Temple of the Sun. And so he was brilliant, he was smart, he was a great leader, and I'm sure he was thinking, these Hebrews, once they see me coming on their side, they're going to want to jump. So he wanted to be their
So
ruler,
do you think he?
not the leader.
See, I thought when he looked this way and that he wanted to make sure it was a good time to kill him.
Yes,
You're
of course.
thinking maybe he wanted to see how many of the Hebrews were watching.
Well, I wasn't really thinking that, but that's an interesting spin
I was
on
thinking
it.
nobody was there.
Well,
Like, let me
obviously
make sure
somebody
no one
was
sees
there.
me. Well, yeah.
So I'm gonna go backwards in his story. So it says that his sister sees that Pharaoh's daughter, or Pharaoh's wife, whatever, takes him in, and she gets his own mother to nurse him. So he's nursed by his own mother in the story. So at some point you realize he knows the story of the Israelites. You know what I mean? Like
For
at
sure.
some point she's whispering him, she's going on. Here's what's interesting: if from birth he's had interaction with his own mom. How long did it take God to convince him? How much did Moses go, no, seriously, if I could stay in this palace and really help things out? You're like, I can stay in my very comfortable situation and I can do all the things to help my people. I just think it's an interesting thought of for 40 years, he probably wrestled with this. How do I not step out of this boat? How do I stay right here? And almost try to convince himself that my authority and my position is going to be the thing that's going to help my people. And I feel like he comes to a place here where he's like,
Not.
Like, I'm in a moment here.
No, I mean, in the movie, it was like one scene.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm Hebrew.
Right.
The Prince of Egypt.
Well, that's what I was going to get at. For me, it's like interesting. I've been raised around the church, and I've probably heard this story 1,000 times, but I've never actually read it for myself. And so I'm learning a lot by we're talking about it right here because it's very different from the portrayal in movies in The Prince of Egypt, where you see him. You know, he doesn't really know his story. The family's gone. He lives with the Egyptians.
Right.
And he's raised in the temple, and you think his life is great. And then when it came to the killing of the Egyptian, he gets away with it because it's like no big deal. They'll just wipe it off his record. He's one of them. He's an Egyptian now.
Right.
He's not a Hebrew, so they don't care. They're like nothing to them. So reading this now, it's like I'm learning that's not the way it really happened. And a buddy of mine had said, "Oh, that movie's not very biblical. You know, The Prince of Egypt is a good portrayal, but it's not biblical." And I was like, "What are you talking about? That's like that's the original story. That was 100% accurate. Like I'm pretty sure they consulted Moses or somebody to write that story.
Like the Bible.
Like the Bible.
Yeah.
It's just like, why do you need to change it? It's a great story.
Even at the beginning, it says it was inspired by the Book of Exodus.
Yeah.
It's actually done by Spielberg, who's Jewish as well. So I think he did some things really well, and other things it just doesn't work for Hollywood.
Yeah, when I think about it, I don't know that I ever really thought about it from the perspective you mentioned, Joe, that maybe he spent a lot of time wanting to do something to help them out, but didn't want to sacrifice, the comfortable life that he had.
Most
Right?
influential, like the top 3 most influential person in Egypt.
Right.
Ruling power of the world. That's a tough give up.
It was.
But at some point, he hasn't been called by God yet. So in his heart, he's thinking, this is what I need to do.
Right.
But God hasn't assigned him to do that yet.
Yeah, he stepped out. I think there was like we mentioned at the beginning, there's a DNA in him that he had this desire to rescue, right? Because he doesn't, he goes to the Midian desert, and one of the first things we read that he does is there's these daughters that are getting chased away by shepherds, and he rescues them and serves them by watering their sheep. So it's part of who he is.
Think about how weird that is. He's the prince of Egypt. He's watering someone else's sheep. Has he ever watered someone else's sheep in his life? If you think about it at that point,
Right. It's all. I mean, it seems like a quick transition, and to be able to walk away completely from being the prince of Egypt, I gotta feel like, we just don't see enough of the backstory. We don't. God had to have been talking. He had to
have been.
absolutely know who he was,
Right.
and him leaving was him trying to wrestle and work that out.
They don't give
I
us
feel
details.
like it's more like
I agree.
I gotta work out what I absolutely already know, because there's no way if you didn't absolutely know that.
Yep.
If God wasn't like, you could. Why would you leave? I mean, you try to work it out there.
Well, he left because Pharaoh was going to kill him.
Well,
Well, I mean, but I think
got
it's
a price on
getting,
his
I think
head
it's
now.
getting to the point
Well,
where
there's death,
all of a
yeah.
sudden he cares enough about the Israelites to kill someone. Like, that probably wasn't a moment. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I
Right,
think about it,
that's
I had
what
the
I'm
benefit of becoming, just what you're saying, like, I had the benefit of becoming a Christian later. The moment I got saved wasn't the first time I'd ever heard about Jesus. It was the culmination of the work God had been doing in my life.
Yeah.
And then where I finally said, okay, I'm in. But it was, even if I didn't, I traced it back better once I became a Christian. leading up to it, I wasn't like, I'm getting ready to become a Christian, you know. But afterwards, I was like,
Sure.
oh shoot, that was all leading up to this moment.
Right.
Well, let me jump in here and just let you know that those of you who jumped on that this is what we call burnt offerings, and we just read a little devotion and we unpack it live right here and see what happens. And you never know what's going to happen. And
Never know what's
today,
gonna happen.
Scott brought us Exodus 2, basically.
It's good stuff.
So I think 14 is pretty significant because here's what the Hebrew says to, you know, when they're fighting and Moses wants to correct them. He says, "Who made you ruler over us?" So you know what I think is, I think Moses had in mind he was going to rule the Hebrews. God said, "No, you're going to deliver the Hebrews." So he just had, he had some things that needed to get worked out. So he needed 40 years, and sometimes, I hate this about me, but sometimes I need a lot of years for God to work out my misconceptions, my sinful nature, in order for me to become more of what God wants me to be.
Yeah. So I've never done this, but you guys always have these questions that tie in. So
I love it.
I just thought of a question.
Yeah.
So, what have you ever had to walk away from because God was speaking to you?
That's good. That's a good question.
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah,
You're walking
unpack
away
that.
from this video?
And no, I could.
Leave
no,
this
but-
place. You guys are getting smoked.
He's
on
gonna
me.
murder Seth first.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna murder Seth, and then
Then I'm running.
why would you murder Seth?
There's witnesses here.
Yeah, there's witnesses.
A whole bunch.
So-
I become known on this video. I didn't know it was filming.
On camera.
So what? And you know, afterwards we'll get hundreds of people watching it. So you just go ahead and type it in later on. We check
still
back.
read 'em. Yeah, we'll
and
read your
We're gonna
comments.
read them and we'll comment on them. So a lot of times we'll get questions popping up right now. But so the question is, from this passage, what have you chosen to walk away from because of what God was speaking to you about?
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm
Another
working
question.
out one where is what changes their heart. So what makes a man go from, so the woman at the well, and I'm maybe all over the place, but it's almost like he had to change her heart. So whether it's Moses or whether it's the woman at the well, you know, or it was the blind man that got healed, or even if you look at Matthew, my question is at what point does God actually turn our heart so that we're actually dying for him rather than for ourselves? And so that was a question that I had for myself, and I'm trying to put that into, what is it? Was it because you were healed? Was it because you were, you know, set free? Was it because someone gave you truth? I don't know. So to me, I feel like sometimes there's an instant that God does that in each of our lives. And what is that? What is that in everybody's story?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Good question.
Well, what's that moment, and what brought you to that moment, right?
Right, and I think in the Bible we look at them, they're all different. You know, like, so Matthew was different than, I forgot the first guy that he said, I saw you looking at the tree.
Andrew.
And was it Andrew?
Yeah.
And he saw, and so in that moment he knew that that was the Messiah, right? So enough so, not just to know that he was the Messiah, enough to drop everything and to
He
go.
has a great response. He's like, my Lord and my God. And Jesus is like, oh, because I saw you earlier. I
Right.
promise you'll see greater things than these. It's a good dialogue.
So say the question one more time, because then when they're watching, we can unpack that.
What's changed your heart? So in your story, maybe it hasn't happened in your story yet. Is what would change your heart to say, this is the King of Kings, this is my Lord over my money, over my wife, over my job, over everything, versus, oh yeah, it's a king that I know, and you know, I know Jesus, and I said the sinner's prayer, I was even maybe baptized, but yet has your heart been turned to be sold out for it, to deny everything else above it? You know, I have a hard time doing that. I mean, don't we all? It's like, you know, the idol of comfort, the idol of like we're talking about with him, right? I'm here, I'm a prince, I've got all of this. Can I do it from my spot? Versus God had to bring him down. He had to humble him. He had to learn how to, you know, to be a farmer or whatever that he had to do. And like someone said, how come it took him 40 years? And I think it was Derek Prince that said, because he couldn't do it in 39.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's interesting about heart change because I had a dialogue with some people before about their political values and or something they didn't like about somebody, I said, you know, you can pray for their heart. Because all behavior, think about everything you stop doing is because God changed your heart. Like, you can manufacture, like, you can be like Pharisees, and you're like, I'm just going to start doing these things. But that's not the same as the radical change when you're like, in your heart, I'm not doing this anymore. This is, it's wrong, or it's right, or whatever it is, good or bad, something switches in your heart to do that. And I think all of us have gone through that at some point in our life about something, right? Even if it was about the person you're going to marry. You're like, in your heart, like, boom, I want to be with you the rest of my life. Like, whatever it is, there's this kind of heart dynamic. So I guess for me, it's happened to me a lot in different times. And I think it's interesting is sometimes God radically kicks down the door of my heart and just arrests it, and I'm broken. Other times I'm submitting my heart to him. Change my heart. Humble me, work on me. So I think it's interesting that the process has not been the same each time. He's surprising me sometimes. I'm like, whoa. Like our 5th year of marriage, I thought we were going to get divorced. Like it was just rough. I was planting a church. Here I am, like doing the most altruistic thing I could do. I'm out there being a church planner, and it was so rough, and I couldn't figure it out. We were having a horrible, and we couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe that Lisa and I were having a tough time. And then all of a sudden, one day, God's like, "You're the problem," and I was like, "Whoa!" I did not see it as me. And all of a sudden, I came home and I just said, "This is me," and she just broke down, and then everything changed from that point forward. But I couldn't see it until God just kind of kicked the door down my heart. He goes, "It's you. It's not her."
Yeah, I think humility is the pathway to, overcoming our failures. Whether it's a marriage failure or moral failure, a business failure, whatever, it's just that humility to say, okay, what's my role in this? I mean, I've done counseling, I don't know if you call it counseling, but talking with people that are going through marriage issues or family issues, and I have yet to find it where it's all one person. Almost always.
Yeah.
95% of the time,
Somewhere in the
it's
middle.
both, right? But when you get in that spot, you always think it's mostly the other person,
Right.
So claiming responsibility, that humility actually gets us past the failure to out of the Midian desert and into God's calling.
Yeah, it's good.
Very good.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Any other heart change stuff from you guys? Thinking about a time. How can you even just think of a specific example where God just changed your heart?
Or even for us, the first question,
Yeah.
what have you ever walked away from because God speaking?
It's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
God kind of like moves
Yeah.
something in your heart and you're like, boom.
He's always asking us to step in faith. So if you walk away from, something, sometimes we aren't sure. So Abraham, again, called to walk away from his family into nothing and not knowing where that is.
There's a guy that's not popular now, Bill Hybels, but at the time from Willow Creek, he was a key speaker at one of the big church planting conferences in Florida. And he said something about the church planners, because it's potential church planners or church planners. He says, do you have a hankering or do you have a call? So if you have a hankering, you're going to be in trouble. You better make sure you have a call. I was like, wow.
Isn't
That's
that what
a
it'd be
really
like
good
with a marriage too? I think I might marry this woman, and then it's like it's like no, you need to be sure,
Yeah.
right? And hopefully God's confirmed whatever that calling is to do, whether it's taking a job or to buy a house, to get married, and ironically, I always like to say it. God made the rules, and in the Bible, if you really know the Bible and you try to study the Bible, He bends the rules all the time. And we kind of think, well, no, that's the law. That's the Jewish law. It's 635 laws. You don't do divorce. But yet God can work through a divorce.
Sure.
God can work through a broken
100%.
church or something else like that.
For those of you online, that's our chatty cameraman, David Barrios.
Yeah, that's it.
So he's
There's his hand. That's all he is.
You hear a voice like the four of us are talking with God, and he's giving us the answers. But thank you, David.
I think as we were talking, I was coming up with my own example. I feel like when you're young, it's hard to think of things because I think we don't have as many years under our belt, so we don't have a lot of
That's
stuff
true.
to offer. It's hard.
You
It's like
don't have much to offer.
I don't have nothing to offer the world. I'm just a shell of a man. But what I was thinking of is when I left my calling, I felt like I was called to do politics. And so I had studied that in college and was going to be an elected official one day. Is what I always wanted to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was my calling until I worked in it for 3 years locally here in politics. And then I just really felt like something needed to change. I felt like I was comfortable and complacent, and I was having fun, but I wasn't really growing in my spiritual walk and in the amount of knowledge that I had about industry and business. And I never wanted to be a career politician where that's all they had to offer. So I really took a step of faith, I think, and left that kind of career that I had planned out for myself since I was a kid to come and work here. And since being here, I've been able to meet people like Eric and all of you guys and get plugged in and get more into fellowship with other men and in Christ-like fellowship, which I think has been important. I would have probably never done that. And being here has allowed me to now we're buying a house and we've started our family. We just found out we're having a son just this weekend.
That's great.
So it's great.
Congratulations.
So a lot of blessings. Thank you. And a lot of blessings are coming. And I know it's because I think I was obedient to take this step and go to a place where I would leave my comfort zone and really challenge myself and
it didn't
get
take
back into
40
the church.
years.
Yeah, it did take
So
40 years. It
unlike
took-
the example.
Well, he
it's all
isn't
been,
there
been
yet.
in a year. I mean, all these changes have been in a year. And I've seen my life radically change in the last year, and I've grown a lot. There's been some challenges, definitely, with family and different dynamics. But ultimately, I feel like we're in a good place, and as a
good.
family, we're growing. So.
How hard is that to shift from not just your calling, but your training?
Yeah.
Like you made an investment into this. Well, how difficult was that?
Pretty difficult, yeah. But it's like I said, it's given me a chance to learn a lot. It's been a big learning curve, but I think it's good, and I think I can take it and use this stuff for the rest of my life, and continue to grow. But yeah, it has been hard. You know, when you're in politics, people feel like having you around it validates their event or whatever they've got going on, and you get a lot of praise from the public and things like that. And I kind of like that. It was kind of like a high you get on that for people appreciating or needing you for their problems.
Nice.
And now when you work in the private sector or out of that world, you don't get that. You're a little bit more behind the scenes in what you do. But I realize it's not really about that. It's about providing for my family and working on myself. So
Funny, I think I'm gonna write a book. I've been kind of.
Sure you are.
I am.
Admiral Scott.
Someday. I think I'm gonna write a book called Confessions of a Narcissistic Pastor.
Nice.
Um,
That's how you
Do
want
you
all
know
those
any?
quotes from me?
yeah.
He asked me for a lot of quotes recently.
Oh.
So I just have learned a lot about.
He writes his own forward.
And his own reviews.
And his own review.
And his own reviews.
That's a great idea.
No, that'd be perfect. in
That'd be
there.
hilarious. On the
Scott.
back.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
back, just all your own reviews.
All of my
That's
own
just
reviews.
you.
Recommended by Scott
Yeah,
Gossett.
considered by 5 stars. Scott,
5 stars by Scott Gossett.
Admiral Gossett.
That'd be a good laugh.
Well, thank you guys for watching. We're glad you turned into burnt offerings, and thank you, Scott, for bringing us Exodus today.
Yeah.
So we just like to read the word together over a cigar.
There's the
and
voice.
there's our cameraman. Who's going to turn it off? I guess we're going to continue because now we're all here at the front side of the lens. So, any last words, guys? We got Holy Smokes coming up this week. I think all over town, right?
Thursday. Is there one today?
Yeah,
Tuesday?
is it?
Tuesday,
Yeah,
yeah.
is it
There's
Jared
one
Fulmer's?
today at Old Town Clovis at the LTD there. There's-
5:30? Is that 6?
5
o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Then
Old
there's
Town
one
Clovis.
at Sierra Vista Mall called Man Cave.
Man Cave
on Thursday.
On Thursday at
That's at
5:30.
5:30 or 4:30? Anyhow,
5.
look
You-
at the website.
You can check it on
Sure.
text. Yeah.
Look at the
Coming
website.
for
And then Thursday we got 4 to 5:30 at the Annex near
Right.
Fig Garden Village. So lots of places if you want to join in a Holy Smoke.
If you're considering starting a Holy Smoke, if you want to facilitate one or host one, make sure you message us because we'll get you on the facilitator call. Once a month, we kind of listen how the facilitators talk about what they're going through and how it's going. So we'd love for you to be a fly on the wall in those Zoom calls, and maybe that'll help you move forward to God's call in your life to start a Holy Smoke.
That's right.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
See ya.
Want to hit the finish button?
There he is. He feels called.
He feels